words cut through the air like a blade. Go back to India. For a split second, it didn't feel real. It didn't sound like the kind of thing a congressional candidate would say into a microphone in front of cameras, lights, and an audience that had gathered to hear ideas, not insults. Yet there it was, hanging in the room, echoing louder than anything said that night. You could see it on people's faces. Eyes widened, some mouths fell open. A few heads turned instantly toward Kash Patel, as if bracing for the impact of what such a slur must feel like. Others glanced nervously at one another, stunned that the line had actually been crossed out loud. What was supposed to be a battle of policies had suddenly turned into something darker, more personal, more primal. The silence that followed was heavier than the insult itself. Cameras zoomed in. The moderator froze. Supporters in the crowd whispered sharply, caught between discomfort and disbelief. It wasn't just a comment about heritage. It was a comment meant to wound, to reduce an American public servant to nothing more than the country his family once came from. In that moment, every immigrant watching from their living room felt the sting. Every child of sacrifice, every family that had struggled to plant roots in American soil, heard the ugly echo of words they had fought so long to silence. It was more than just politics. It was the age-old weapon of exclusion, delivered with a smirk under the lights of a national stage. Leavitt's expression carried that confidence of someone who thought she had landed the blow. She leaned back, arms crossed, waiting for the ripple of laughter from her supporters, but instead she was met with an unsettling quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you the line has been crossed, that what was just said is bigger than cheap applause lines. Eyes turned toward Kash Patel. His face was still, calm, almost unreadable. He didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact. He simply waited, the insult hanging between them like smoke. The room held its breath. Viewers leaned closer to their screens, because what Kash Patel was about to say in response, no one in that room was prepared for. To understand the weight of that moment, we have to rewind. This wasn't just a casual exchange, not a passing remark caught offhand. It was a debate broadcast under bright lights, covered by local and national press, streamed across platforms where thousands tuned in for answers about the future. The stage was meant to showcase vision, policy, and character. Instead, it revealed something raw, something far more dangerous. The moderators had opened with questions about the economy, about jobs, about foreign policy. Kash Patel answered with the ease of someone who had been there, who had seen how power worked in Washington, who carried the lived experience of a man whose family had built their lives brick by brick in America. Karoline Leavitt, young, ambitious, eager to prove herself as a fighter, leaned into the culture war rhetoric that had made her a favorite among certain circles. To her, confrontation was the point. But no one expected the line she crossed. Because when she turned to Patel, ignored the question at hand, and spat out, "Go back to India," she didn't just attack a man. She attacked the very idea of belonging in America. That's why the silence afterward was so deafening. It wasn't about two political opponents trading barbs. It was about the line between disagreement and dehumanization. For millions of immigrants, it was a reminder of every airport interrogation, every classroom taunt, every whispered remark that questioned whether they truly belonged. For millions more, it was a mirror reflecting America's unfinished struggle with its own promise, that this land belongs to all who believe in it, not just those who happen to be born into it. In that auditorium, you could feel the tension ripple. Outward, supporters shifted in their seats, torn between loyalty to their candidate and the unease of watching someone weaponize ancestry on live television. The journalists in the back scribbled furiously, already knowing they had their headline. And those watching at home felt it in their bones, the realization that this was no longer about a policy dispute. This was about identity, about the soul of the country, because Kash Patel's presence on that stage was itself a story. The son of immigrants who came here seeking opportunity, now a lawyer, a public servant, an American standing in the arena of ideas. He was proof of the American promise. To reduce him to go back to India was to strip away all that. To insist that ancestry could erase loyalty, service, sacrifice, and that's why this confrontation mattered so deeply. It wasn't just Patel under attack. It was the millions of Americans who have been told in subtle ways and blunt words that they don't belong. was the clash between two visions of the nation, one narrow and exclusionary, the other broad and inclusive. The cameras caught at all the insult, the silence, the waiting. And outside that hall, America was already reacting. Phones buzzed, clips were cut, tweets were fired off. The story was leaving the debate stage and entering the bloodstream of national conversation. Because what Kash Patel was about to do next would not only answer the insult, it would ignite a firestorm that stretched far beyond that room. And yet, within minutes, this single insult would spiral into a national conversation. Karoline Leavitt did not stumble onto that stage by accident. She had built her brand with Karen image sharpened through countless interviews, press appearances, and stump speeches where she presented herself not just as a politician, but as a warrior. Young, brash, unapologetic, she wore her combativeness as a badge of honor. To her supporters, it made her fearless. To her critics, it made her reckless. But in either case, it made her impossible to ignore, from the very beginning of her political career. She leaned into the culture wars. While others hesitated, worried about the fallout of incendiary statements, she charged forward. She knew that outrage drove headlines, that sound bites traveled faster than nuanced arguments. And so she wielded provocation like a sword, quick, sharp, and meant to wound. Her speeches were peppered with attacks on the media, with barbs against immigrants, with grand declarations that she was the only one bold enough to tell it like it is. Her fans adored it. They saw her as the antidote to political correctness, as the young firebrand who would fight battles older politicians no longer had the stomach for. In rally after rally, the crowd roared when she dismissed opponents as weak, mocked their backgrounds, and dismissed entire groups of Americans as unworthy. That night on stage, her posture revealed everything. Leaning forward, chin raised, she exuded the overconfidence of someone who believed every exchange was hers to dominate. The cameras cut to her. She laughed dismissively when Patel spoke about policy, as though serious answers were a waste of breath. Her role wasn't to debate, it was to attack, to destabilize, to land blows that would live on as viral clips. The attack dog persona wasn't just a quirk, it was her entire strategy. By constantly staying on offense, she denied her opponents room to breathe. She thrived in chaos, enforcing the conversation into the gutter where dignity and decorum stood no chance. For her, politics wasn't about persuasion, it was about humiliation. And humiliation, if delivered with enough confidence, could look like victory. But arrogance carries its own blind spots. In her eagerness to land the sharpest jab, she mistook cruelty for strength. She convinced herself that audiences always rewarded aggression, that every insult would score points, that any line could be crossed as long as it drew attention. This is why "Go Back to India" came so easily from her lips. It was not hesitation, but instinct. For her, identity was not sacred ground. It was ammunition. And in her calculation, degrading Patel's ancestry would weaken him, make him defensive, and shift the balance of the debate back into her hands. Yet, what she underestimated was the shifting tide of American culture itself. Yes, there were those who cheered on brashness, who fed on division, who mistook cruelty for candor. But there were far more who had grown weary of it, who longed for dignity in public life, who understood that the strength of America came not from exclusion, but from inclusion. The audience's silence after her remark should have told her everything. The gasps, the awkward shifting, the sudden absence of applause, these were the signs that her weapon had misfired. But in the moment, wrapped in the cocoon of her own arrogance, she didn't see it. She thought she had landed her punch. She couldn't see, but what the cameras captured was the brewing storm. Patel's steady composure, the audience's discomfort turning into sympathy for him, the journalists scribbling furiously, knowing they had just witnessed something that would dominate headlines. And the millions at home who were no longer just watching a debate, they were watching a story unfold. Because by crossing that line, Karoline Leavitt did more than insult a man. She gave Kash Patel the opening to embody the very dignity she lacked. She set the stage for him to transform her cruelty into a lesson, her arrogance into a downfall. She had spent her career thriving on shock tactics. But this time, the shock would not serve her. This time, the attack dog persona would backfire. Because in trying to score cheap points, she awakened a storm she could never control. To understand why the insult failed, why it boomeranged back on the one who hurled it, you have to know the man it was aimed at. Kash Patel was not some anonymous figure plucked from obscurity for a debate stage. His very life story had been written in the ink of struggle, sacrifice, and service, the kind of American journey that turns insults into irrelevance. Patel's story begins long before his own birth. The parents who left India in search of a better life. They arrived in the United States not with wealth or connections, but with determination. Their first years here were hard, long hours, small paychecks, sacrifices invisible to the world but deeply felt within the family. They worked jobs that most people overlooked, jobs that kept the country running quietly in the background. They carried the unspoken promise to their children, "You will have the chance to go further than we ever could," growing up. Patel witnessed that sacrifice firsthand. His parents weren't simply working, they were building, laying brick after brick of opportunity for their children. They believed fiercely in America, not as an abstract idea, but as a land where dignity was earned through work and loyalty. And Patel absorbed that belief until it became part of his very identity. Education was his path upward. He studied relentlessly, carving out a future that seemed impossible from the modest beginnings of his family. Law school followed one of the most demanding crucibles of intellect and endurance. But for Patel, it wasn't about prestige. It was about equipping himself to serve, to defend principles larger than himself. His legal career soon became intertwined with public service. He wasn't just another lawyer chasing billable hours. He became an advisor, a voice inside the halls of government where decisions carried weight across the nation. He stepped into roles that required clarity, composure, and above all, loyalty to the Constitution. For Patel, patriotism was never a slogan. It was a lived discipline, expressed in hours of service, in the belief that America could always be made better by those who gave their all. And yet, through it all, Patel carried himself without arrogance. He never sought the spotlight. Demeanor was calm, deliberate, a man who let his work speak louder than his words. Those who knew him often remarked on his steadiness, how little rattled him, how rarely he allowed emotions to cloud his judgment. In a world addicted to spectacle, Patel embodied a quieter strength. That strength mattered most in moments like the one that unfolded on that stage. 'Cause for Patel, the attack was not new. Every immigrant, every child of immigrants has felt its shadow at some point. The question, where are you really from? Suspicion, the doubt, the insinuation that no matter what you achieve, you might never be fully American. Patel had lived with those echoes, but instead of letting them wound him, he had let them forge him. Each slight became proof of how much further he could go. By the time he stood on that stage across from Karoline Leavitt, Patel's life was already the embodiment of the American dream. From immigrant roots to lawyer, from family sacrifice to government service, he represented what so many families yearned for: a chance to belong not by accident of birth, but by the force of belief and effort. That was why the insult was doomed. Because Patel's story was larger than it. His presence was larger than it. He carried with him the millions of stories like his own, families who had endured the sting of exclusion but refused to let it define them. He carried with him the quiet power of dignity, a power that no insult could unravel. And when he stood there, calm and still, as the words "go back to India" rang out, he was not merely a man waiting to reply. He was the sum of his parents' sacrifices, his own labor, his loyalty to the Constitution, his unwavering belief in the promise of America, which is why his response mattered so much. Because he wasn't answering only for himself, he was answering for every immigrant child who had heard those words in a classroom, for every worker who had felt them whispered on a job site, for every citizen whose Americanness had been doubted because of their skin, their name, or their accent. So when the insult came, Patel didn't just defend himself. He defended the very idea of America. The debate stage seemed to shrink after the insult. What had felt like a forum for ideas now felt like a cage fight, with the audience trapped inside the tension. The air was heavy, as though everyone present knew they had just witnessed something that crossed a threshold too obvious to ignore. A cough broke the silence. A shuffle of shoes against the auditorium floor. The moderator glanced down at his notes, pretending to search for the next question. But even he seemed frozen, waiting to see what would happen. The cameras didn't cut away. They zoomed closer. They knew the story was no longer in policy points or prepared lines. The story was in the stillness of Kash Patel and the smirk of Karoline Leavitt. Leavitt leaned into her microphone again. Emboldened by her own words, she pressed forward, doubling down. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," she insisted, her voice louder now, sharper, carrying that edge of defiance that she thought made her untouchable. A few supporters in the back clapped awkwardly, trying to break the tension with noise, but it fell flat. The applause died quickly, drowned out by the unease that filled the room. Her eyes darted around, searching for approval, craving the validation of a laugh or cheer. But instead, what she saw were expressions of discomfort, even among her own base. She had gone too far, and somewhere in her gut she must have known it, but pride wouldn't let her pull back. So she did what she always did. She attacked harder. Patel, however, remained perfectly still, not defensive, not rattled. His hands rested lightly on the podium, shoulders relaxed, face steady. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. If anything, his silence spoke louder than her words. He looked directly at her, as if he were watching not a rival, but a performance. It's a familiar act that no longer held any power over him. The contrast between them was striking. She agitated and restless, trying to claw back control of the moment with noise. He, serene and unshaken, letting her burn through her energy until the audience could see the imbalance for themselves. In that calm, Patel transformed the room. He shifted the weight of attention without speaking a word, and the audience began to lean toward him. Their eyes moved from her flailing bravado to his quiet composure. People whispered to one another, sensing that something was about to happen. It was no longer a question of whether he would respond. It was a question of how. The silence stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. Leavitt's attempt at bravado had backfired, and in the gap between her words and his, the audience's anticipation swelled into suspense. Every camera in the room stayed fixed on Patel. Every microphone waited for his voice, because the real battle wasn't in her insult, it was in his answer. And everyone knew the next words would determine not just the winner of the exchange, but the legacy of the night itself. Then, with the room hanging on his every word, Patel began. Kash Patel raised his head slowly, the lights glinting off his calm expression. He didn't rush. He didn't bite back in anger. He let the silence breathe, let it swell until every single person in the room leaned forward. His voice, when it finally came, was steady quiet at first, almost forcing the audience to lean closer. "You know," he began, "I've heard those words before. Go back to India. I heard them when I was a kid on the playground. Heard them in classrooms, in locker rooms, even in places where I was just trying to belong. And every single time, I let those words remind me of something bigger, that my family didn't come here for permission. They came here with purpose." The crowd stirred, a murmur rippling through the seats. Patel's cadence was deliberate, like a man who had rehearsed this moment not in words, but in the life he had lived. "My parents arrived in this country with nothing but faith," he continued, his tone rising, his shoulders square. "Faith that if they worked hard, if they sacrificed, if they believed in the promise of America, their children could have a better life. And they were right, 'cause here I am standing on this stage, serving the country that gave them a chance." A smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger as others joined in. Leavitt shifted uncomfortably at her podium, her confident smirk fading as Patel's words began to pierce the room. Patel glanced briefly at her, then back to the audience. "So when someone tells me to go back to India, let me tell you exactly where I'm from. I'm from the long nights my mother worked so her kids could study. I'm from the sweat on my father's brow as he built a life brick by brick. I'm from the Constitution I swore to uphold, from the sacrifices of every immigrant family who believe that this flag belongs to them too. The auditorium erupted in clapping, cheers echoing against the walls. The energy shifted palpably. Where moments earlier there had been tension, now there was electricity and audience rallying not around insult but around dignity. Patel let the noise rise, then lowered his voice again, pulling the crowd back into stillness. I am America. My family's sacrifices, my service, my love for this country. That's the story of millions. Millions who came here not to divide, not to tear down, but to contribute, to build, to give more than they ever took. That's who I am. That's who we are. The phrase hung in the "I am America," simple, defiant, unshakable. Leavitt tried to interject, fumbling for her microphone. This isn't about your family, it's about, but her words were drowned out by the roar of the crowd. People rose to their feet, some clapping, others nodding, others shouting affirmations. The cameras caught it all, her flustered expression, his composed stance, the audience choosing dignity over division in real time. Patel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk, simply held the moment steady as ever. You see, he said, patriotism isn't about tearing down someone else's roots. It's about deepening your own. It's about loyalty not to bloodlines, not to ancestry, but to principles, to freedom, to justice. To the belief that this country is big enough, strong enough, and noble enough for all of us. The words struck like a chord. You could almost feel the shift in the air, the audience transformed from spectators into witnesses of something larger. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a lesson, a reclaiming of what it meant to belong. Leavitt's hands fidgeted at her notes, her eyes darting, as if searching for a line, a retort, anything to claw back the ground she had lost. But there was nothing left. Patel's words had reframed the entire debate. It was no longer about him versus her. It was about an insult versus America itself. He paused again, letting silence do its work. I've dedicated my life to this country. I've stood in courtrooms defending its laws. I've advised leaders, worked behind the scenes, and done my part to honor the promise of America. So if you think you can strip away my belonging with one insult, then you don't understand what America truly is. Because America isn't about where your parents came from, it's about where all of us are going together. Another wave of applause swept the room, this one louder than before. Some people stood, clapping above their heads. The moderator, who had been frozen in discomfort earlier, now looked stunned by the transformation of the atmosphere. Patel leaned in slightly, his voice soft but firm. So no, I will not go back, because I never left. This is my home, my fight, my America. The final words hit like a gavel, sealing the moment. The crowd roared, drowning out everything else. Leavitt tried again to speak, but the noise consumed her, her figure shrinking beneath. The weight of Patel's calm authority. It was the kind of moment debates are remembered for, not a statistic or a policy point, but a flash of truth that cuts through the noise. A reminder that the most powerful weapon in politics is not arrogance, but authenticity, not cruelty, but conviction. Patel's voice lingered even after he stopped speaking. The audience's faces glowed with something deeper than applause of validation, pride, inspiration. For many, it was the first time they had seen someone take the ugliest insult and turn it into a declaration of Americanness. Leavitt looked rattled, her usual swagger gone, her eyes darting as though she could escape the reality that the narrative had slipped from her control. The contrast was undeniable, one figure sinking under the weight of her own words, the other rising taller with every sentence he spoke. The cameras cut across the room, faces wet with tears, heads nodding, fists pumping in solidarity. The story was already bigger than the stage. It was already spilling onto timelines destined for viral clips, hashtags, debates on television panels, because Patel had done more than respond. He had shifted the meaning of the insult. He had turned it inside out, transforming it from an attack into a testament. And as his final words echoed, the ripple effect spread far beyond that room. The clip hit social media before the debate had even ended. Within minutes, the moment was everywhere. Kash Patel standing tall, declaring, "I am America," while Karoline Leavitt fumbled behind her podium. The words alone carried force, but in video form, the contrast was devastating. Her sneer, his poise, the audience's eruption. It was a cinematic takedown that required no editing, no commentary, just replay. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag I Am America surged to the top of Twitter trends. Instagram filled with reels of Patel's speech, remixed with music, stitched into. TikToks paired with captions like, "This is what dignity looks like." Memes flooded into Leavitt, frozen mid-scowl beside Patel's serene face. Overlaid with words like class versus clownery, the internet had chosen its narrative, and the choice was overwhelming. Cable news snapped to attention the next morning. Anchors replayed the clip on a loop. Commentators who rarely agreed on anything found common ground in praising Patel's composure. "This," one said, "is how you answer hate with grace, with strength, with unshakable belief in who you want." Panelists nodded, calling it a defining moment in political rhetoric. One went further. It wasn't just a defense, it was a reframing of patriotism itself. Then the celebrities joined in. Actors, musicians, and athletes quoted Patel's line, "I am America," to their millions of followers. Some posted images of their own immigrant parents, pairing them with his words. The phrase turned into a mantra, a rallying cry that extended far beyond politics. Suddenly, T-shirts were printed, digital posters shared, even murals sketched in city streets. It wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. But the most powerful voices were not famous. They were ordinary Americans, posting in the quiet hours of the night, writing raw, emotional reflections. A Latina nurse wrote, "My parents were told to go back too, watching Patel stand his ground. That's my America." A black veteran commented, "That man reminded me why I served." An Asian American teenager posted a selfie with tears in her eyes. "He spoke for all of us who've been told we don't belong." The comment sections overflowed with affirmation. Stories poured out, stories of sacrifice, of resilience, of pain and pride. People weren't just watching Patel, they were seeing themselves in him. Meanwhile, Leavitt scrambled to contain the damage. Her campaign pushed out statements claiming she had been taken out of context, that Patel had overreacted, that the real issue was something else entirely. But every spin attempt fell flat. Screenshots of her exact words circulated endlessly. Clips replayed again and again. Her excuses looked desperate next to Patel's calm strength. The more she tried to claw back, the deeper she sank. Conservative corners of the internet attempted to rally behind her, but even there, cracks appeared. Some critics quietly admitted she had gone too far, that the insult was ugly, indefensible. Others refused to touch the controversy at all, letting the silence speak for itself. And the mainstream, though, the narrative was locked. Patel had risen, Leavitt had crumbled, the energy was unmistakable. Commentators called it a turning point, not just in the debate, but in the broader cultural conversation. Patel's words weren't just defended, they were celebrated, amplified, immortalized in the way only viral political moments can be. And yet, for all the noise online, for all the headlines and hashtags, something deeper was happening. Away from the glare of cameras, away from the chaos of feeds and trending charts, millions of Americans sat quietly in their living rooms, reflecting. Parents turned to their children and told stories of their own journeys. Grandparents nodded in recognition of sacrifices long past. Young people, often cynical about politics, felt a rare surge of pride, because Patel's words weren't only about him. They were about the universal yearning to belong, to claim America not as an inheritance of the few, but as the birthright of all who build it. And that struck chords in places no algorithm could measure. The noise was thunderous. The momentum was undeniable. But the most powerful moment wasn't online. It was the silent reflection of millions watching at home. In the days that followed, the noise faded into something quieter, steadier, more enduring. The viral moment was no longer just about one insult or one debate. It had become a mirror for America. And when Kash Patel finally spoke again, outside the glare of stage lights, he gave the story its true meaning. Standing before a small crowd, he chose not to dwell on the ugliness of the words hurled at him. Instead, he turned the lens outward, reframing the entire encounter. "That insult was not about me," he said. "It was about a vision of America that still clings to the belief that belonging can be questioned, that some of us are forever outsiders. But the truth is simple. Belonging is not determined by skin color, accent, or ancestry. Belonging is defined by love of country, service to community, and a commitment to the ideals that make America possible." The audience leaned in, listening not as spectators, but as participants. Because Patel wasn't just telling his story, was speaking their story, the story of millions whose Americanness had been doubted, dismissed, or demeaned. He raised his voice, not in anger, but in conviction. Every generation of immigrants has been told at some point to go back, but what they did instead was build. Build families, build businesses, build communities, build this very nation. America does not belong to one face, one faith, or one heritage. America belongs to all who believe in her promised land, who defend it with their work, their sweat, their hope. The words struck deep. Heads nodded, eyes welled with tears. Because in that moment, the insult was no longer an attack. It had been transformed into a lesson, a rallying cry, a declaration that no one could take away. Patel reached his crescendo with a truth that felt bigger than politics. Our strength has never been in uniformity, it has been in our diversity. 1,000 backgrounds, 1,000 stories, bound together by a common dream. That is what makes us unbreakable. That is what makes us American. And that is why hate will never have the last word. Now the room erupted. In the startled gasps of the debate stage, but in the warm thunder of affirmation, applause rose, not just for him, but for themselves. For the shared recognition of dignity reclaimed. Then he turned, looking not only at those in front of him, but directly through the camera, reaching into living rooms and kitchens across the country. His words were deliberate, personal, inescapable. "This is not just my story, it's yours. It's the story of anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, anyone who's ever been underestimated, anyone who's ever chosen dignity over hate. That is the American story, and it will always be stronger than fear." The final note hung in the air, not as a sound, but as a feeling, a conviction that this moment, born of insult, had been claimed as something far more powerful. Reminder that America's promise does not shrink when challenged. It expands when defended with courage. In the end, Patel's victory wasn't about silencing an opponent. It was about awakening a nation to its better self, and for millions watching, the lesson was clear. This was their story too, of dignity, of belonging, America itself. It began with an insulted, cruel command meant to wound, to reduce Kash Patel to something less than American. Go back to India. Those words echoed like a slap, dripping with the weight of centuries of exclusion. But what followed turned that ugliness on its head, because Patel did not answer with anger. He answered with truth. He answered with dignity. He reminded the nation that his story, his family's sacrifices, his service, his love for the Constitution is not an exception, but part of the great American tradition. He transformed venom into vision, reminding millions that patriotism is measured not in ancestry, but in commitment to ideals. That is why the moment still resonates. Because hate shouts loudly, but truth carries further. Because dignity always cuts deeper than cruelty. And because every immigrant, every child of sacrifice, every believer in the promise of this country saw themselves in his response. This was never just about Patel versus Leavitt. It was about the America we choose to be. Do we allow hate to define us, or do we rise again and again to prove that belonging cannot be stripped away? So here's the call. If you believe America is bigger than hate, share this story. If you believe dignity is stronger than division, let this message be louder than any insult. And if you believe that the fight for inclusion, justice, and belonging is only beginning, then stand with us. Subscribe. Speak up. Stay engaged. Because this is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a movement. And together, we will ensure that no voice of hate ever drowns out the chorus of America.